The Sethari Dominion measured the worth of a thing by how brightly it burned on a sensor screen. This was not poetry to them. It was law, doctrine, and religion braided into a single unquestioned truth that had held for 11,000 years. A warship's honor was the size of its signature. A civilization's right to exist was the scale of the wake it dragged across the dark. What could not be seen did not matter, and what could not be measured did not, in any way that counted, exist. The Sethari had built an empire on that certainty, and the certainty had never once failed them. So when the lone human vessel crossed the outer marker of the Keseth Reach and lit up on the Dominion picket fleet's long-range arrays, the reaction aboard the flagship was not alarm. It was laughter. The dreadnought Eichmer's crown hung at the center of the picket like a mountain that had decided to fly. 2.5 kilometers of layered armor and sensor mast and gun throat. She was the pride of the Ninth Cordon, and her bridge was a cathedral of light. Ranks of Sethari officers stood at their tiers, their long gray-scaled faces lifted toward the great hemispherical display that wrapped the command deck in a living map of the void. On that map, 10,000 friendly icons glimmered in disciplined constellations. And there, crawling in from the edge, was one small, apologetic smear of heat and hull. "Ordinator," said the sensor prefect, and there was already a smile buried in the word. "We have a contact, single vessel. Human registry markers." Overmarshal Veen Carroll turned from the tactical rail with the unhurried grace of a creature who had never in his life been surprised. He was old for a Sethari, which meant something close to 200 years, and his scales had gone the pale silver of long command. He looked at the smear on the display. He looked at the numbers scrolling beside it. And then, slowly, he did the thing his officers would tell their broods about for the rest of their lives. He laughed. It began low, a dry clicking in the throat that was the Sethari way of it, and it spread. The bridge crew took it up because their Overmarshal had given them permission, and the sound rolled around the cathedral of the command deck like water finding its level. Carroll let it run. He wanted it to run. Contempt, properly shared, was a bonding agent stronger than any oath. "Read me the profile," he said at last when the clicking had thinned enough for his voice to carry. "Read it aloud. I want the deck to hear." The sensor prefect obliged, and he did not hide his relish. "Mass 4,000 tons. Ordinator, our escort tenders mass more. Hull composition irregular. The plating does not match itself. There are 4 distinct alloy signatures across the surface as if the vessel were assembled from the corpses of other vessels." A ripple of the dry laughter. "Thermal signature high and untidy. Her drive leaks. Her reactor leaks. She is, forgive me, warm the way a sick animal is warm. Emissions across 60 bands, none of them shielded. Ordinator, I have seen freight barges run quieter. I have seen mining scows run quieter." And her armament. 2 spinal mounts of an obsolete pattern, point defense clusters, some of which appear to be missing. No capital weapon, no carrier bay of any size, no signature consistent with a cloak, a jammer, or a war-grade emitter. The prefect turned from his station and inclined his head. "Ordinator, if this is the vanguard of a human incursion, then the humans have surrendered before we have fired." Carroll folded his long hands behind his back and regarded the little smear of heat with something almost like affection. "Do you know what it is?" he said. "That the lesser species never understand about war. They believe it is about courage, about will, about the great swelling of the heart." He tilted his head, the Sethari gesture of pity. "It is about mass. It is about energy. It is about being seen coming from far enough away that your enemy has already lost before he has decided to fight. This," he gestured at the human ship, "this is a species that has not learned to be seen properly, and so it has not learned to matter." He gave the order to broadcast. That was the part that would matter later, though no one on the bridge of Eichmer's crown could have known it. Carroll was a proud creature, and pride wants an audience. He did not simply mock the human ship among his own officers. He opened a wideband channel, unencrypted, contemptuous in its very openness, and he let the whole of the Kesith reach hear the Dominion laugh. "Human vessel," he said, and his translated voice went out across the dark in 40 languages. "You have entered a sovereign cordon of the Sethari Dominion. We have measured you. We find you beneath the dignity of a warning shot. Turn your sick little hull around, crawl back to whatever forge yard vomited you out, and tell your masters what you saw here, that the Dominion looked at their finest and did not trouble to raise its voice. You are dismissed, human. You were dismissed before you arrived." He cut the channel. The bridge clicked its approval, and out on the edge of the map, the small, warm smear of the human ship did not turn around. It kept coming. Aboard that ship, in a compartment far too small for the weight of what it carried, a young woman was listening to every word. Her name was Mira Sato, and she was 23 years old, and this was the first posting of her life. She sat at the electronic warfare station of the StarForge vessel Cinder with her knees drawn up on the crash seat and her headset pressed to one ear, and she listened to an empire tell her she did not exist. Around her the compartment hummed with the particular sound of the Cinder, which was not the clean whine of a proper warship but a low, complicated breathing murmur, as though the ship were an old animal asleep and dreaming. Cables ran along the ceiling in bundles thick as her arm. Half the panels had been pulled and left off, their guts exposed, jury-rigged, patched. Someone had written Cinder on the main bulkhead in paint by hand, and beneath it in smaller letters, "She gives back what she takes." Mira had read that line 100 times in the 4 months since she had come aboard, and she still did not entirely understand it. She understood it a little better now, listening to Overmarshal Carroll laugh. "They're broadcasting it open," she said. "The whole reach can hear him." "Good," the voice came from the command chair behind her, unhurried. "Let them." Captain Reuel Ash did not look like the master of a warship, and the Cinder did not look like a warship, and both of those facts were, Mira had come to understand, entirely the point. Ash was a broad, weathered man with gray coming into his beard and hands that had done a great deal of physical work. He wore no rank on his collar. He sat in the command chair the way a farmer sits on a porch, loose and watchful, and he had not raised his voice once in the 4 months Mira had known him. He was watching the same display she was, the great gray wall of the Sethari picket fleet rendered in careful human iconography, and there was no fear in his face at all. "Ensign," he said, "you've got the emissions log. Tell me what you heard in that broadcast, not the words, the shape of it." Mira swallowed. This was a test. Everything aboard the Cinder was a test, quiet and constant, and she had learned that the captain never asked a question he did not already know the answer to. "He's confident," she said, "overconfident. He didn't encrypt because he doesn't think we're worth encrypting against. He broadcast wide because he wanted witnesses. That means," she worked it through, "that means he cares about how this looks. He's playing to an audience." "And a man playing to an audience," Ash said, "is a man who can be made to look bad. Go on." "Their censor doctrine." She pulled the intercept data across her screen, the great fan of Sethari emissions washing over the Cinder like light over a stone. "It's incredible, sir, the volume of it. They're not hiding anything. They're broadcasting their own sensor sweeps at full power, all of them, constantly. It's like," she searched for it, "it's like a man walking through a dark house shouting so he won't be afraid. They see everything. They light up the whole dark and they see everything in it. And what's the weakness in a man who sees everything?" Mira was quiet for a moment. On the display, the wall of Sethari ships glimmered, 10,000 strong, arrogant and radiant and utterly certain. She thought of Carol's voice. "You were dismissed before you arrived." "He's never learned to look for the thing he can't see," she said slowly, "because he doesn't believe there is one." Behind her, Captain Ash smiled, and it was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who has spent 30 years learning a trade that everyone told him was worthless, and who has finally, after all that time, arrived at the one place in the galaxy where it was about to matter more than anything else in the world. "Chief," he said, and now he raised his voice just slightly to carry down the ladderway to engineering. "How's the veil?" The answer came back in a woman's voice roughened by decades of recycled air and welding smoke. Chief Engineer Audrey Van had built half the Cinder with her own hands and rebuilt the other half twice. "Warm and hungry, Captain. She'll hold for a full transit. Maybe two, if nobody sneezes on my reactor." "Nobody's going to sneeze on your reactor." "Somebody always sneezes on my reactor." Ash stood. He was not a tall man, but the compartment seemed to organize itself around him when he rose, the way a room does around the one person in it who knows exactly what is about to happen. He walked to the forward viewport. A real viewport, actual transparent hull, another thing no proper warship would waste mass on, and he looked out at the enemy fleet with his hands loose at his sides. "They think we're a joke," he said to the compartment, to the crew, to Mira. "And they're right in a way. Look at us. We're patched together out of scrap. We leak heat like a cracked kettle. We couldn't win a straight fight with one of their escort tenders, let alone that." He nodded at the dreadnought hanging vast and radiant at the center of the map. "So we're not going to have a straight fight. We're going to have the other kind." "The kind we're good at," said Audrey's voice from below. "The kind we're good at." Ash turned from the viewport. His eyes found Mira, and there was something in them that she would remember for the rest of her life, a kind of steady handing over. The moment a young person realizes that the adults in the room are not going to save her, because the whole point is that she is one of the people who saves. "Ensign Sato, in about 90 seconds I'm going to give you an order, and when I do, this ship is going to disappear. Not run, not hide, disappear. Off their screens, out of their doctrine, gone from the only world they believe in. And then we are going to walk through the middle of the finest fleet the Sethari Dominion has ever fielded, and we are going to teach 200 years of certainty a new word." Mira's mouth was dry. "What word, sir?" Captain Ash looked back out the viewport at the laughing Empire. "Wrong," he said. He returned to the command chair and settled into it. On the display, the picket fleet had begun, lazily, contemptuously, to open a lane, not for the Cinder but around her, the way a crowd steps around a beggar, unwilling even to acknowledge the small warm ship still crawling toward them. Somewhere on the bridge of Eichmer's crown, Mira knew, they were still clicking their dry laughter, still reading her profile aloud for sport, still certain, down to the marrow of their doctrine, that they had already won. "Ensign," said Captain Ash, "bring up the veil." Mira put both hands on her console. The veil was not a cloak in any sense the Sethari would recognize, and that was the whole genius of it, the thing the StarForge yards had spent 40 years and more lives than anyone talked about learning how to build. It did not bend light. It did not project a bubble of nothing. It did something far stranger and far more human. It listened to the enemy's certainty, and it gave the enemy exactly what the enemy expected to find. It read the shape of the hole the Cinder made in the Sethari sensor net, and it filled that hole with the ship's own absence, folded and refolded, until the sensors reported not a cloaked vessel, which would have been a screaming alarm, but nothing at all. No target, no shadow, no hole. Just the smooth, untroubled dark that the Dominion had believed in for 11,000 years. Her thumb found the activation stud. She looked back once at Captain Ash, and he nodded. "Do it," he said. "Let's go be a ghost." Mira pressed down. And on the great cathedral display of Eichmer's crown, in front of 200 years of Sethari certainty, the small, warm smear of the human ship winked out of the universe. For 3 full seconds, no one on the bridge of the dreadnought said anything at all. The laughter had not even finished. It hung in the recycled air, half-clicked, dying, as 10,000 pairs of gray Sethari eyes turned toward the place on the map where a thing had been and now, impossibly, against all doctrine, was not. The sensor prefect leaned toward his station. His scales had gone very still. "Ordinator," he said, and for the first time his voice had lost its relish entirely. "The contact is gone." Carol did not turn from the tactical rail. Then it fled, as I told it to. Log the. No, Ordinator. The prefect's hands moved fast across his instruments now, the ease gone out of them. Not fled. A fleeing vessel leaves a wake. A drive flare, of course, a diminishing return we track to the horizon. This, he swallowed. This contact did not depart. It did not turn. One instant it was present, and the next instant it was. He stopped, because the word he needed was a word his doctrine did not contain, and he had to reach for it like a man reaching into cold water. It is not gone, Ordinator. It is simply not there. There is no wake. There is no shadow. The sensors report clean dark, as though it had never existed at all. At last Overmarshal Veen Carroll turned around. The affection was gone from his face. In its place was the very first flicker of a thing that no Sethari of the Ninth Cordon had felt in a very long time, a thing so unfamiliar to him that it would take several minutes more before he was willing to give it its name. He looked at the empty place on the map where the joke had been. "Find it," he said. Find it. 2 words, and by any measure they should have been easy words for the Ninth Cordon to obey. The picket fleet had been assembled for exactly this. To see, to hold, to deny the dark to anyone the Dominion had not invited into it. 10,000 hulls carried between them more sensor tonnage than most species possessed in their entire navies. If there was a doctrine older than the doctrine of mass, it was this one, drilled into every Sethari cadet from the first day of training. The void has no corners. There is nowhere to hide from the sight of the Dominion, because the Dominion has taught itself to see everything at once. So the Ninth Cordon did what it had been built to do. It looked. 10,000 vessels dumped power into their arrays. The Keseth Reach, already bright with Sethari emissions, blazed. Long-range sweeps, close-range grids, active pings that hammered out into the dark and waited for the honest echo of a hull. The sensor prefect coordinated it from Eichmer's crown with the fluid competence of a man who had done this 10,000 times, tightening the net, overlapping the fields, leaving no volume of space unexamined for longer than a heartbeat. It was, by every standard the Sethari had, a perfect search. It found nothing. Aboard the Cinder, Mira Sato watched that perfect search wash over her ship like surf over a stone, and she did not move, and she did not breathe, and she watched the veil eat it. "They just went a full active," she murmured. "All of them. Coordinated grid, the prefects running it off the flagship." Numbers flooded her display, the Sethari sweeps rendered as sheets of moving light. "Sir, they're putting enough energy into that net to boil a moon. If the veil has any margin at all, this is where we find out." "Chief," said Captain Ash mildly, "you heard the ensign." "I heard her." Audrey Van's voice floated up from engineering, and under the roughness there was a thin, bright thread of tension, because for all her scoffing the chief loved her machine and feared for it the way one fears for a thing one has made. "The veil's drinking every ping they throw and folding it back clean. But she's getting warm, Captain. She turns their noise into our silence, and that costs, and every ping they send I've got to eat. If they hold this up long enough, I overheat, and if I overheat, I have to vent, and if I vent, we get warm and untidy again," Ash finished. "Like a sick animal. Like a sick animal that just reappears in the middle of 10,000 guns. Yeah." "How long?" A pause filled with the sound of Audrey doing some she did not like. "At this intensity, 40 minutes, maybe 50. Then I have to dump heat or I lose the reactor, and either way we're visible." 40 minutes. Mira looked at the great gray wall of the fleet on her display and did the geometry, and her stomach tightened. To cross the picket, to do what Captain Ash said they had come to do, would take most of an hour at the slow, cold, careful pace the veil demanded. They did not have the margin. They had less than the margin, and the Sethari had only just begun to look. She understood, then, that the ship was not going to survive by hiding. It was going to survive by doing something worse to the enemy than hiding, and she understood, a heartbeat later, that this was the thing Captain Ash had been telling her all along in his slow, porch-sitting way. The Cinder did not run. The Cinder did not hide. The Cinder went and did the other kind of fighting, and the other kind of fighting was this. You did not defeat an enemy who saw everything by becoming invisible. You defeated him by teaching him to be afraid of the dark he had never once feared, and you let his fear do to his fleet what your guns never could. Captain, she said slowly, the veil buys us silence, but silence isn't a weapon, not against a fleet this size. If we just creep across quiet, they'll grit us down eventually, or Audrey cooks, whichever comes first. That's right. So the plan isn't to stay hidden. No, Ensign, it isn't. Ash leaned forward in the command chair. The plan is to make 10,000 certain creatures uncertain. A frightened fleet is a slow fleet. A frightened fleet second guesses. A frightened fleet starts to see us in places we aren't, which is a great deal more useful to me than them not seeing us at all. He turned his weathered face toward her. You told me their weakness. A man who sees everything never learns to look for the thing he can't see. So we don't stay the thing they can't see, Ensign. We become the thing they can't stop seeing. Everywhere, all at once. In every shadow they've got. How? Captain Ash smiled his cold smile. You're the electronic warfare officer, you tell me. And there it was again, the handing over, the weight coming down on her 23-year-old shoulders in the middle of an enemy fleet. Mira Sato looked at her console. She looked at the sheets of Sethari emissions washing over her ship, all that arrogant certainty pouring out into the dark, and she thought about what she had said before, about a man walking through a dark house shouting so he won't be afraid. And slowly, an idea began to assemble itself in her mind, ugly and jury-rigged, and entirely in the spirit of the ship, whose guts hung exposed from every ceiling around her. They're broadcasting their own sweeps at full power, she said, constantly. Unshielded, because they've never needed to shield them. Who was ever going to use a Sethari sensor sweep against a Sethari? She was talking fast now, the way she did when the shape of a thing came clear. The veil already reads the exact structure of every ping they send. It has to fold them back, which means I have the key to their whole grid. I know what their pings look like. I know the format. I can. She stopped, hardly daring. Sir, I can make one. I can build a false echo in their own language and slip it into their net, and their sensors won't reject it, because it's a Sethari signal. I can make them see a ship where there isn't one. A ghost, said Ash. A ghost, a dozen ghosts. As many as I can render before Audrey cooks. She looked up, and now the fear had a shape she could use, and a plan was a warmer thing to hold than a fear. I can't make us invisible forever, but I can make them so busy chasing ships that don't exist that they never trip over the one that does. For a long moment Captain Reuel Ash simply looked at her, and in that look was the whole reason he had taken a green ensign fresh out of the StarForge programs onto the most dangerous ship in the human fleet. Then he nodded, once, the way a man nods at a bet he has decided to make. Do it, he said. But Ensign, and here his voice dropped, and the porch-sitting ease went out of it, and for just a moment she saw the 30 years underneath, the lives that had gone into learning this trade, the reason a ship called Cinder had a line painted under her name about giving back what she takes. When you put a ghost in front of a frightened man with 10,000 guns, he does not step aside politely. He fires. He fires at his own shadows, and sometimes his shadows are his own ships. Do you understand what I'm asking you to start? Mira looked at the wall of gray icons, the 10,000 certain hulls, the laughing empire that had told her she did not exist. Yes, sir, she said, I understand. She had thought she understood. She would learn over the next hour exactly how much she had not. She built the first ghost carefully. It took her 9 minutes, hunched over her console with her tongue between her teeth, threading a false return into the Sethari grid the way a surgeon threads a needle into a vein, slowly, exactly, feeling for the moment the enemy's own system accepted the lie as truth. She built it out of the Cinder's own stolen profile, the very thing Carol had read aloud for sport, 4,000 tons, leaking heat, untidy emissions, obsolete guns. She built the Ghost to look exactly like the joke the Overmarshal had already dismissed. And then she let it appear, not near the Cinder but far across the picket, out on the opposite flank, 40,000 kilometers from where the real ship crept cold and silent through the dark. On the bridge of Eimer's Crown, the sensor prefect's station chimed, and every scale on his body went rigid. "Contact," his voice cracked on the word. "Ordinator, the human vessel, I have it, it's—" His hands flew. "It's on the far flank, grid 7, the Vareth escort group, it appeared, Ordinator, the same profile, the same untidy signature, it's there." Carol was already moving. Then it did not vanish. It slipped our net and repositioned. "Sloppy work, Prefect. I want to know how a leaking scow crossed 40,000 kilometers of my grid unobserved. Vareth group, engage, destroy it. Restore the Vareth escort group engaged. 6 Sethari cruisers, proud and radiant, turned their guns on the small warm smear that had appeared in their midst and opened fire with the full contemptuous fury of an empire that had been made to feel, for a few minutes, uncertain. Lances of directed energy carved the dark. The little joke of a ship was bracketed, straddled, hammered from 6 directions at once by weapons that could scar a moon. And the little joke of a ship was not there. It had never been there. It was a knot of the Sethari's own sensor language, tied by a 23-year-old human at a station 40,000 kilometers away, and when the Vareth group's weapons passed through the empty space where their certainty told them a ship should be, they did not stop. Directed energy does not stop for the absence of a target. It flies on, straight and true, until it finds something to spend itself against. What it found was the far edge of the Vareth group's own formation. Mira watched it happen on her display, and her breath stopped in her throat. One of the 6 cruisers, positioned across the empty target from its fellows, took a full-power capital lance from its own squadron mate along its dorsal spine. The Cinder's sensors, cold, passive, drinking everything and emitting nothing, caught the flare of it, the sudden blossom of a Sethari drive core breached by Sethari fire. The cruiser did not explode. It simply went dark, its lights guttering out section by section, as its crew fought a fire in their own reactor that no enemy had lit. The captain's voice was very quiet behind her. "There it is," said Reuel Ash. "There's the other kind of fighting." On the bridge of the dreadnought, the sensor prefect stared at the sudden casualty in the Vareth group, and could not, for a moment, make his mouth work. "Ordinator," he managed. "We have the Vareth group has taken we have lost the cruiser Ilmath." He stopped. He did not want to say it, saying it made it real, and it was the kind of real that ended careers or worse. "To friendly fire, Ordinator. They fired on the contact, and the contact was not the contact." And here at last the censor prefect of the Ninth Cordon looked up at his Overmarshal with gray eyes gone wide, and he said the thing that no doctrine had prepared him to say. "Ordinator, I do not believe the contact was ever there. I believe we fired on a thing that did not exist, and I believe," his voice dropped to almost nothing, "I believe it wanted us to." Veen Carroll stood very still at his tactical rail. Around him, the great cathedral of the bridge had gone quiet, the dry clicking laughter of an hour ago now a memory that shamed everyone who had shared it. On the vast hemispherical display the fleet glittered, 10,000 strong, radiant and certain, and for the first time in the living memory of every soul aboard, afraid. Carroll had commanded fleets for 140 years. He had put down rebellions and shattered incursions, and taught 3 species in a row the price of testing the Dominion. He knew fear the way a physician knows a symptom, and he knew what it did to a fleet, how it moved from ship to ship faster than any signal, how it turned discipline to brittleness and cohesion to 1,000 jittering individual terrors. He knew that the true danger of this moment was not the human ship at all. The true danger was what his own fleet would do to itself if he let the fear take root. "Cease active fire, all groups," he said, and his voice was iron and it carried across every channel of the Ninth Cordon. "No vessel is to engage a contact without triple confirmation from 3 separate hulls. I will space the crew of any ship that fires on a shadow. Do you hear me? The humans have a trick. A cheap, cowardly, clever trick, and its only power is our own fear. So we will not be afraid." He turned slowly, letting the fleet feel the weight of him through the channel. "We will find the real ship. We will do it patiently. And we will remember, all of us, that this is a leaking scow crewed by a species that has not learned to be seen. It is not a ghost. It is not a god. It is a joke that has learned one trick, and one trick is all it has." It was a good speech. It was exactly the right speech. And Mira Sato, listening to every word of it 40,000 kilometers away, understood something about Overmarshal Veen Carroll that she had not understood before, and that she would need very badly before this was over. He was not a fool. He was the most dangerous kind of enemy there was. A proud man who had just, in the space of 10 minutes, become a careful one. "He's good," she said quietly. "Captain, he's good. He shut the panic down. He's not going to fire at shadows again." Oh, Ash agreed. "He's not, which means the easy part's over." He rose from the command chair and crossed to the display, and he studied the great gray wall of the fleet with the expression of a man reading weather. "He'll go slow now, patient, triple confirmation. That's exactly right and exactly what I'd do, and it's going to make the next hour the hardest work you've ever done in your life, Ensign, because now you're not fighting his fleet." He looked at her. "Now you're fighting him, one careful man thinking. And you're going to have to be more patient than he is, and colder than he is. And you're going to have to do it while my chief engineer's reactor gets closer to cooking with every minute that passes." Mira looked at the wall of the fleet. Somewhere behind it, past the picket, was the thing the Cinder had come all this way to reach. The thing Captain Ash had not yet told her, the reason for all of this. And between her and it stood 10,000 ships and one careful, frightened, brilliant old creature who had just stopped laughing. "Then I'd better get to work," she said, and she bent over her console and she began to build the second ghost. The second ghost was harder, because Carroll was watching now. Mira did not build it the way she had built the first. A frightened man will fire at anything. A careful man interrogates what he sees, and she could feel the difference in the Sethari grid the way a sailor feels a change in the sea. Their sweeps had gone slower, deeper, more suspicious. When a return came back that did not match 100 cross-checks, the flagship no longer scrambled a squadron to kill it. Now the flagship studied it, held fire, and asked 3 separate hulls whether they saw the same thing before it would believe its own eyes. So Mira did not give them a ship, she gave them a doubt. She built the second ghost faint, and wrong, and only half there. A flicker of the Cinder's profile at the very edge of detectability, out beyond the fleet's far pickets, in a place a fleeing human ship might logically go. She built it to look exactly like a real ship trying and failing to hide. And then, before the flagship could get its triple confirmation, she let it fade. Not vanish cleanly, the way the veil made the real Cinder vanish, but degrade, smear, break apart into sensor hash the way a genuine contact does at the ragged edge of range. On the bridge of Eichmer's crown, the sensor prefect watched the flicker come and go and did not know what to do with it, and the not knowing was the whole point. "Ordinator," he was choosing his words like a man crossing ice. "I have a possible contact, grid 9 beyond the outer pickets, consistent with the human profile, but it will not resolve, it appears, it degrades, it is gone. I cannot get confirmation, because it does not hold still long enough to confirm." Carroll came to stand beside him and studied the grid. "Is it the ship, or is it another lie?" "Ordinator, the prefect's throat worked. "I do not know, and that is the worst answer I can give you, and I know it, but it is the true one. If I say it is a lie and it is the ship, we let it escape. If I say it is the ship and it is a lie, we chase it and leave a hole in our picket for the real vessel to slip through. I cannot tell them apart anymore. That is what this weapon does, Ordinator. It does not blind us. It teaches us to distrust our own sight. And that, Mira thought, listening, was exactly it. That was the whole of it. Captain Ash had not sent her to hide the Cinder. He had sent her to poison the one thing the Sethari trusted most in the universe, their own certainty, and she was watching the poison work. "He can't tell anymore," she said softly. "Captain, the prefect just said it out loud on an open channel. He can't tell the ghosts from the ship. He stopped trusting his own sensors." "Then it's spreading," said Reuel Ash. "Good. Now we find out what kind of man the Overmarshal really is. A weak one starts firing again out of nerves. A strong one does the thing that scares him most." He watched the gray wall of the fleet. "He stops trusting his sensors too. And a Sethari who can't trust his sensors is a Sethari who's lost his religion. Watch what he does with that ensign. It'll tell us everything." What Carol did with it was worse than either of them expected. "Prefect," said the Overmarshal, and his voice on the intercepted channel had gone very quiet and very cold. "If our sensors can be lied to, then we will stop asking our sensors. Order all groups to hold formation and go dark. Full passive. No active sweeps, no pings, no emissions of any kind. If the humans are reading our own sensor language to build their lies, then we will stop speaking it. Let us see how the joke fares against a fleet that has gone silent." On the Cinder's display, Mira watched 10,000 Sethari ships do the one thing she had been certain they never would. The great arrogant blaze of the Ninth Cordon's emissions, the shouting in the dark house, began, group by group, to go out. The sweeps died. The pings ceased. The pouring, contemptuous river of sensor noise that the Veil had been drinking and folding and turning into silence for the better part of an hour simply stopped. And Chief Engineer Audrey Van's voice came up from engineering, tight with alarm. "Captain, they just went passive, all of them. The Veil's designed to eat their active sweeps. That's where it hides us in the noise. If they stop sweeping, there's no noise to hide in. We go from invisible in a storm to a cold ship sitting in a quiet room with 10,000 people listening for a footstep." A pause. "The good news is my reactor stops cooking. The bad news is we lose our cover. If one of their passive arrays picks up so much as our heat bleed, they don't need triple confirmation. They'll have the real thing and they'll know it." Mira's hands went still on her console. She understood, with a cold clarity, what Carol had done. He had found the one move that turned her own genius against her. The Veil fed on the enemy's noise. Carol had taken the noise away. And now the Cinder was a cold, silent ship in a cold, silent fleet, and it was no longer a contest of who could see the most. It was a contest of who could hold their nerve in the dark the longest, and the Sethari had 10,000 ships and the Cinder had one. "He turned it around," she said. "Captain, he stopped shouting. He's listening now. He made himself into us." Reuel Ash was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke there was, for the first time, real respect in his voice, the respect of one professional for another across an unbridgeable gulf. "So he did. 140 years of doing it one way, and he threw the whole religion overboard in 10 minutes because the situation demanded it." He shook his head slowly. "That's the most dangerous thing an enemy can do, Ensign. Learn. Most of them can't. This one can." He turned. "Chief. Cut everything. I mean everything. Life support to minimum, no recyclers, no active systems, no heat we don't have to make. We drift, cold as the rock around us. We become a stone. Captain, if I cut the recyclers, we've got maybe 2 hours of air before." 2 hours is more than we need. Cut it." The Cinder died around Mira Sato. Not truly, but it went so cold and so quiet that it might as well have. The lights dimmed to emergency red. The breathing hum of the ship, the sound she had come to think of as its sleeping animal murmur, faded until she could hear her own heart. The temperature began slowly to fall. And in that red-lit silence, the whole crew of the Cinder, all 9 of them, held still and held their breath, and drifted cold as a stone through the middle of a fleet that had gone hunting for the sound of a footstep. This was when Captain Ash finally told her why they had come. He crossed to her station in the dim red light, moving slowly to make no heat, and he crouched beside her crash seat so he could speak low. "You've earned it," he said. "You should know what you're dying for if it comes to that. Do you know what's behind this picket, Ensign? What the Ninth Cordon is really guarding?" She shook her head. "A forge yard," Ash said. "A Sethari one, the largest in this arm of the galaxy, Kesseth Deep. They build their dreadnoughts there, hulls like Ihmer's crown, 3 every year for 11,000 years. And 2 months ago StarForge intelligence learned that Kesseth Deep had finished something new. A sensor weapon. A thing that does to whole star systems what their picket does to a volume of space. Lights up everything, sees everything, denies the dark across 100 light-years at once." His weathered face was very still in the red light. "If they finish the array and deploy it, then every trick we have dies. The veil, the ghosts, all of it. Because all of it depends on there being a dark to hide in, and their weapon ends the dark. Every human ship becomes a joke on a screen everywhere forever. That's what we came to stop." "9 of us," Mira whispered. "1 ship, against a forge yard behind 10,000 hulls." "9 of us," Ash agreed. "1 ship, because it's not a job for a fleet, Ensign. Send a fleet and they see it coming from 100 light-years off, and they finish the weapon early and turn it on. This is a job for a thing they can't see. A thing they laughed at. A thing they dismissed before it arrived." He put one broad hand on the back of her crash seat. "You're going to get us through this picket cold and quiet and unseen, and then you're going to get us to Kesseth Deep, and then Chief Van and I are going to make very sure the Sethari never finish that array. And the reason it's you at that station, and not some gray-haired specialist twice your age, is that this work belongs to the ones who can learn faster than the enemy can. You've been learning faster than him all night. Keep doing it." Mira looked at the dim red console, at the cold silent fleet drifting past on the passive display, and she felt the whole enormous weight of it settle onto her, and she found, to her own surprise, that she could carry it. Fear was a thing you could put down and pick up. The work was the thing that stayed. "Then I need to give the Overmarshal his religion back," she said. Ash's eyebrows rose. "Say again." "He went passive because I poisoned his sensors, but he hates it. Captain, you saw, 140 years he's trusted those arrays, and now he's flying blind on purpose and it's killing him. His whole fleet is flying blind. 10,000 ships holding formation on passive, no sweeps, terrified of the dark they never feared." Her mind was moving fast now, faster than the fear. A fleet like that in the dark gets jumpy. They start to hear footsteps that aren't there, not from me, from themselves. Their own nerves. And if I give them one real fright, one thing they can't explain, in a fleet that's already primed to panic and forbidden to sweep. "You start the thing Carol's whole speech was designed to prevent," Ash finished slowly. "You make his fleet turn on itself. Only this time he can't calm them by telling them to trust their sensors, because he's the one who told them to switch their sensors off." A slow, cold light came into the captain's eyes. "You'd use his own discipline against him. His own good order, the thing that makes him dangerous." "Every strength is a weakness if you push on it right," Mira said. "You taught me that first week aboard." She was already pulling up the passive display, already searching the drifting fleet for the seam, the fault line, the place where fear would run fastest if she lit it. "I can't build a ghost anymore. There's no active grid to slip it into, they're all passive. But I don't need their grid. I've got the veil, and the veil doesn't just hide us. It can put out a signal shaped like anything I want in any band I choose, aimed anywhere I aim it. A drive flare, a hull groan, a distress cry in Sethari. One sound in the dark, exactly where 2 nervous squadrons are staring at each other across empty space, both of them forbidden to sweep, both of them straining to hear a footstep." Captain Ash was silent for a moment. Then he stood slowly in the cold red light, and he looked down at the 23-year-old ensign who had come aboard his ship 4 months ago knowing nothing, and who was about to teach 10,000 of the finest warriors in the galaxy to be afraid of each other in the dark. "Do it," he said, "but pick your seam carefully, ensign. When this starts, it's not going to stop, And somewhere on that flagship there's a careful old creature who is going to understand, the moment it starts, exactly what we've done to him. And when he understands, Ash looked at the great gray wall of the fleet, silent now, waiting, cold. When he finally understands what's been hunting his fleet all night isn't a scared little ship at all, that's when we find out what the Sethari Dominion is really made of, and whether 9 of us are enough to get past it. Mira Sato bent over her console in the red-lit dark, cold to the bone, drifting like a stone through the heart of an empire that had laughed at her. And she began, very carefully, to choose where to make the fear begin. Out in the silent dark, 10,000 ships held their breath and listened. And in a moment, in the quiet, they were going to hear something move. She found her seam on the fleet's spinward flank, where 2 escort squadrons, the Varith remnant, still rattled from losing the Ilmeth to their own guns, and a fresh group called the Denhel, held station across 4,000 kilometers of empty space. Both were on strict passive. Both were forbidden to sweep. Both, she could tell from the tiny involuntary bleed of their systems, were crewed by Sethari whose nerves had been filed down to nothing by an hour of hunting a ghost in the dark. Mira Sato reached into the veil, and she made a sound. It was not a loud sound. That was the art of it. A loud sound is a thing a disciplined crew reports and logs and waits on. She made a small sound, an ambiguous sound, exactly the kind of thing a frightened mind supplies for itself when it has been staring too long into the dark. A brief flare of drive plasma, there and gone, in the empty gulf between the 2 squadrons, shaped in Sethari frequencies, aimed so that the Varith group saw it against the Denhol group's bearing, and the Denhol group saw it against the Varith group's bearing. To each of them, it looked like the other had lit its drive. To each of them, in the forbidden silent dark, it looked like something moving where nothing should move. Then she went silent again, and she waited, and she let their own fear do the rest. For 11 seconds nothing happened, and those were the longest 11 seconds of Mira's life. Then the passive display bloomed. The Denhol group flinched first. One cruiser, its captain's nerve finally breaking after an hour in the dark, violated the Overmarshal's direct order and lit a single active ping. Just one, just to see, just to be sure, into the empty gulf where the drive flare had been. And the Varith group, already primed, already certain that something was hunting them, saw the sudden hostile emission of an active weapons-grade array pointed directly at them out of the dark, and did not wait for triple confirmation, because triple confirmation is a thing careful men do, and there were no careful men left in the Varith group. They fired. Mira watched it unfold on the cold passive display, silent and terrible and entirely of the Sethari's own making. The Varith group opened up on the Denhol cruiser that had pinged them, and the Denhol group, seeing their own hull torn open by fire from the dark, returned it, and within 9 seconds 2 Sethari escort squadrons that had served the Dominion for 100 years were killing each other across 4,000 kilometers of empty space, each of them certain, absolutely certain, that they were fighting the human ship. "It started," she said, and her voice did not sound like her own. "Captain, it started." "I see it." Ruel Ash watched the 2 squadrons tear at each other in the dark, and there was no triumph in his face, only the grim attention of a man watching a thing he had set in motion and could no longer stop. "Now we move. While the whole flank is looking spinward at a battle that isn't us. Helm, slow and cold, mind the heat. Take us through the gap their panic just opened. Ensign, keep them frightened. Every minute you buy us is a minute closer to Kesseth Deep." The Cinder began to move, cold, silent, a stone drifting through a fleet that was starting at its edges to come apart. And Mira Sato worked. She did not build more battles, one was enough, and a good craftsman does not overuse a tool. Instead, she fed the existing terror, a whisper here, an ambiguous flare there, keeping the fear alive and moving, hurting it, so that the confusion on the spinward flank never quite resolved into calm. A distress signal in Sethari, faint, from the wrong direction. a drive grown where there was no drive. She played the Ninth Cordon's nerves like an instrument she had been given only tonight and was learning to master in real time, and the fleet that had laughed at her 4 hours ago tore at itself in the dark. On the bridge of Eichmer's Crown, Overmarshal Veen Carroll watched his fleet begin to die by its own hand, and he finally understood. It came to him all at once, the way the truth does to a mind clever enough to bear it. He had been thinking of the human ship as prey, a clever, slippery, cowardly prey, but prey, a thing that hid and ran and survived by not being caught. And prey did not do this. Prey did not turn a fleet against itself. Prey did not poison an admiral's certainty, and then, when the admiral responded correctly, use the very correctness of the response as a weapon. He had gone passive to deny the enemy his censor language, and the enemy had thanked him for it, because a fleet blind and disciplined and afraid was exactly the fleet the enemy had wanted him to build. Every move Carroll had made all night, every careful, correct, professional move, had been a move the human ship wanted him to make. He had not been hunting them, they had been hurting him. "Stop firing," he said, and then, louder into every channel of the Ninth Cordon in a voice that cut through the panic like a blade, "Stop firing. All groups, all hulls, cease fire, cease fire, cease fire. You are not fighting the humans. You are fighting each other. The human ship is not on the spinward flank. The human ship has never been where you were looking. Stand down your weapons, or by the throne I will have every captain who fires another shot broken to the mines." His gray eyes swept the great cathedral display, the fleet fracturing on the flank, the holes opening in his once perfect picket. "It is one ship, one small ship, and it is not beating us with guns. It is beating us with our own fear, and the only weapon that has ever existed against fear is discipline. So be disciplined, be Sethari. Hold." It was, Mira thought, listening, the finest thing she had ever heard an enemy do. The fleet did not stop all at once. Fear does not obey a single order, but it began to stop. Carroll's will moved through the Ninth Cordon ship by ship, steadying it, and the guns on the spinward flank fell silent one by one, and the fracturing slowed and held and began, slowly, to knit. "He stopped it," she said. "Captain, he stopped it again. He understood what I was doing and he stopped it." "I know." Ash watched the fleet steady itself on the display. "I told you, he learns. That's twice now he's found the counter faster than I'd have believed. We're not going to break that fleet, Ensign, not with tricks, not tonight. He's too good and there's too much of it." He turned from the display and his weathered face was calm. "But we don't need to break it, we just need to get through it. And thanks to you, there's a hole in his spinward flank the size of a moon, and he's spending all his will closing it. Helm, are we through?" "Through the picket, Captain." The pilot's voice was tight. "We're past the last of them, open dark ahead, and then a pause, and then Kesseth Deep." Mira looked at the forward passive display, and there it was. She had never seen anything like it. Kesseth Deep filled the dark ahead like a second sky, an artificial nebula of light and structure, dry docks the size of moons, a Sethari forge-yard 11,000 years in the building, where dreadnoughts like Eichmer's Crown were born 3 a year in cradles of fire. And there, at its heart, wrapped in scaffold and guarded by its own dedicated squadron, was a structure that matched no ship and no dock, a vast skeletal array, half-built, reaching out into the dark like the ribs of something enormous and unfinished. The sensor weapon, the thing that would end the dark forever, the reason 9 humans had crawled cold and silent through the heart of an empire that laughed at them. "There it is," said Captain Reuel Ash very quietly. "There's the end of the dark." He looked at it for a long moment, and then he did something Mira had never seen him do. He walked to the main bulkhead, to the place where Cinder was painted by hand, and beneath it the line she had never fully understood. She gives back what she takes. And he put his hand flat against the cold metal, the way a man touches something he has loved for a long time. "Chief Van," he said, "bring the reactor up, all of it, every scrap of power she's got. We're done hiding." "Captain," Audrey's voice startled. If I bring the reactor up, we light up like a beacon. Every passive array in the fleet sees us at once. We lose the veil, we lose the dark, we lose everything. I know exactly what we lose. Ash's voice was gentle and terrible and utterly certain. We've spent all night being the thing they couldn't see. And it got us here, to the one place in the galaxy where being unseen doesn't matter anymore. Because we're inside their guard, past the picket, close enough to touch the one thing they can't afford to lose. So now we stop being a ghost. He turned, and he looked at his crew, all 9 of them, in the dim red light of the ship they had built and patched and loved. Now we let them see exactly what a joke can do when it finally decides to stop being funny. Behind him, the reactor of the StarForge vessel Cinder began, for the first time all night, to roar. And on the bridge of Eimer's crown, 40,000 kilometers back, at the very moment Overmarshal Veen Carroll had finally, brilliantly, steadied his fractured fleet, the sensor prefect station lit up with the single brightest contact of the entire night. A human ship. The human ship. No longer a smear, no longer a ghost, no longer a doubt. A hard, blazing, unmistakable return, reactor wide open, running hot and proud and utterly without fear, deep inside the Dominion's guard, 40,000 kilometers behind the picket, bearing directly for the half-built weapon at the heart of Kesseth Deep. The prefect stared at it. For 4 hours he had begged the dark to show him this ship, and now that it had, he found he was more afraid than he had been in all the hours of not knowing. "Ordinator," he said, "it's at Kesseth Deep. It was never running, it was never hiding. It came here. It walked through the entire Ninth Cordon to get here, and now his voice failed him, now it wants us to see it. Ordinator, why would it want us to see it?" Veen Carroll looked at the blazing contact deep behind his lines, bearing down on the one thing in the Dominion he could not afford to lose. And at last the ancient creature understood the final shape of the trap, and understood that he had been beaten not 4 hours ago and not 1 hour ago, but from the very first moment he had opened his mouth to laugh. "Because," he said softly, "it is out of my reach, and it wants me to know it, it wants me to watch." He gripped the tactical rail with both long hands. "All groups," he said, and for the first time in 140 years there was something in the Overmarshal's voice that his fleet had never heard. "Reverse. Full power. Back to Kesseth Deep. Every hull, every gun now." But even as he said it, he was doing the geometry, the cruel simple geometry of 40,000 kilometers and a fleet turned the wrong way, and he knew, the way he had known so many things tonight a fraction of a second too late, that he was not going to get there in time. The run in toward Kesseth Deep was the loudest 15 minutes of Mira Sato's life, and the strangest, because for the first time all night, the Cinder was not trying to be quiet. The reactor roared beneath the deck plates. The little ship blazed on every sensor in the region like a struck match held up in a dark room, and it did not care. And the not caring was its own kind of terror after 4 hours of holding her breath in the cold. "They see us," she reported, and her voice had to rise now over the sound of the ship. "Everyone sees us. The guard squadron's powering up. And Captain, the Overmarshals turned the whole Ninth Cordon around. 10,000 hulls full burn coming back for Kesseth Deep. Time." She ran the geometry and did not like the answer, then ran it again and liked the second answer better than she had any right to. "The main fleet can't make it. 40,000 kilometers turned the wrong way. They're minutes too late and Carroll knows it. I can see it in how he's flying. He's not even trying to catch us. He's trying to reach the array before we do. But the guard squadron's already here. 6 cruisers. They'll be in weapons range of us before we're in range of the weapon." "Then the guard squadron is the whole problem," said Ash. "Everything else is just noise coming late. Chief, how's the spine?" "Charging," said Audrey Van, and there was iron in it. "1 shot's all she's got in her, Captain. Fold a whole reactor down to a needle, and you get 1 needle. Missin' we're a cold ship in a hot room with 6 angry cruisers and no teeth." "Then we won't miss." Ash's voice did not change. "Ensign, keep reading them." I want to know the shape of that guard the second before they commit. Mira bent to the work, but something had begun to nag at her, a small wrongness in the pattern of the Sethari signals, and she had learned tonight to trust the small wrongnesses. Overmarshal Carroll was not flying like a man who had given up. He was flying like a man reaching for a last card, and Mira did not think a creature that clever reached for a card that was not there. She found it 30 seconds later, and her blood went cold. "Captain," she pulled it onto the main display, the thing she had almost missed in the blaze of the burning bright approach. "The array, the weapon, it's half-built. We all thought it was inert, just structure and scaffold, but there's power moving in it. Carroll's ordering the Forge crews to bring it up. He can't finish it, there's not time, but he doesn't need to finish it. He needs to fire it once, unfinished, right now at us this close." She stared at the numbers, at the terrible logic of them. A weapon built to light up 100 light-years, fired half-made at point-blank range at one small ship. It won't be precise. It'll be a flood. But we're 40,000 kilometers inside their guard, and there's nowhere to hide from a flood of light. "Captain, if that array fires before we do, the veil doesn't save us. Nothing saves us." For the first time all night, the compartment was silent except for the roar of the reactor. "How long," said Ash, "until it can fire?" 90 seconds, maybe less. The Forge crews are fast. Mira's hands were already moving, already searching, already refusing to accept the arithmetic she'd been handed, because that was the thing the Cinder had taught her, that every certainty was a seam if you pushed on it right. And we're 110 seconds from firing range on the array. "Captain, they beat us. On the timing, they beat us by 20 seconds. Carroll found the one move." "That turns our own speed against us," Ash finished quietly. "Of course he did. He's been doing it all night." He looked at the half-built weapon powering up on the display, and the old calm did not leave his face, but something behind it went very still. 20 seconds. "Ensign, I need 20 seconds. Can you buy me 20 seconds anywhere on that board?" And Mira Sato looked at the board, at the 6 cruisers of the guard squadron, at the half-built weapon drinking power, at the Forge crews rushing to fire an unfinished god at a ship the size of a house. And she found her 20 seconds in the last place a Sethari would ever think to defend, because it was the place a Sethari trusted most. "The array's drawing its charge from the fabrication core," she said, fast now, the whole shape of it coming clear. "Same core that feeds the dry docks. It's not shielded from its own supply lines. Why would it be? Who was ever going to attack a forge yard from inside its own guard?" She was already reaching into the veil, already shaping the loud half of the ship's one gift, the ability to speak a signal in any voice she chose. "I can't touch the weapon, but I can touch the crews feeding it. Their own language, their own command channels, unshielded because they've never needed shielding. Same as the picket, same as everything. They never learned to guard against themselves." She looked up at Ash, and there was no fear in her now, only the cold, clean focus of a craftsman at the top of her trade. "I can send the Forge crews and abort," in the Overmarshal's own voice. "Priority override, full authority, cease charging the array." "They'll obey it." Carroll spent all night teaching that fleet that discipline is the only weapon against fear, and discipline means you obey the Overmarshal's voice without stopping to check. He built that reflex. I'll use it. "He'll countermand it," said Ash, "the second he hears it." "Yes, but not instantly. He has to notice it, realize it's false, override the override. That's a few seconds of confusion at the top and a few seconds of hesitation at the bottom, and hesitation is exactly what I've been selling that fleet all night." Her hands were poised over the console. "It won't stop the weapon, Captain. It'll just make it late. 20 seconds late." Captain Reuel Ash looked at his ensign for one heartbeat, and then he smiled the almost gentle smile. "Send it," he said. Mira sent it. She shaped the abort in Veen Carroll's own cadence. She had listened to that voice for 4 hours. She knew its weight, its coldness, the particular way it landed on a command. and she threw it down the Forge crew's own unshielded channels with the full stolen authority of the Overmarshal of the Ninth Cordon. Cease charging. Priority override. By the throne, cease. On the half-built array, the flood of power hesitated. It was exactly as she had said. The Forge crews, drilled all their lives to obey that voice without the insolence of checking, began to abort the charge. And then, seconds later, the real Carol's fury came howling down the same channels, countermanding, screaming that the First Order was false, that it was the humans, that they must charge. And now the Forge crews had two commands in the Overmarshal's voice, contradicting each other, and they did the thing that frightened, disciplined creatures do when their certainty fails them. They froze. 20 seconds, Mira breathed, watching the charge stall on the display. You've got your 20 seconds, Captain, maybe more. They can't tell which order is real. Because you taught them not to trust their own ears, said Ash. Same as you taught them not to trust their own eyes. He took hold of the command chair, and the roar of the reactor swelled toward its peak as the Cinder crossed the last of the distance to firing range. That's the whole trade, Ensign. That's the whole of what we do. We don't beat them with mass. We take the thing they trust most in all the world and we give it back to them broken. Ahead, growing on the display, the half-built weapon hung stalled and confused at the heart of the burning bright forge yard, and the 6 cruisers of the guard squadron were only now closing to form their wall, seconds behind where they should have been, because every clock in Keseth Deep had been running on human time since the moment the reactor first roared. Firing range on the array in 30 seconds, said the pilot. The guard squadron reaches us first, said Mira. They'll have their wall up in 20. Then it comes down to the wall, said Reuel Ash, and he settled into the command chair the way he had settled into it 4 hours ago on a porch at the edge of an empire that had laughed at him, and he looked at the 6 cruisers moving to interpose between his one small ship and the thing it had crossed a fleet to kill. 1 shot, 1 lane through 6 hulls. Ensign Sato. And here he looked at her, the last handing over, the whole weight of it coming down on the 23-year-old at the electronic warfare station of a ship built out of scrap and secrets, and 40 years of a trade the galaxy had called worthless. Find me the seam. Mira Sato turned to her board, and she looked at the wall of the guard squadron forming up ahead, and she began, one last time, to read the nerves of frightened, disciplined, dangerous creatures for the single open lane she knew their own discipline would leave her. The guard squadron of Keseth Deep did not have to cross 40,000 kilometers. They were already there, wrapped around the half-built weapon like scales around a throat, 6 heavy cruisers and a scattering of gun platforms, the dedicated defenders of the most precious thing the Sethari Dominion had ever built. And now, blazing on their screens, running hot and open and unafraid, came the joke that had unmade the Ninth Cordon. They did not laugh. Whatever had happened out on the picket, however garbled the reports, the guard of Keseth Deep had heard enough to know that the small warm ship bearing down on them was not funny. They powered up their weapons and they moved to interpose, and they did the professional, correct, disciplined thing, and Mira Sato watched them do it, and felt the last of her fear go very cold and very quiet inside her, the way water goes still before it freezes. 6 cruisers, she said, between us and the array. Captain, they're forming a wall. We can't ghost past them. We're lit up, they can see us, and there's no dark left to hide in this close to the forge lights. She turned in her crash seat. The veil can't get us through that. No, Ash agreed. Can't. He was standing at the center of the compartment, calm as still water, and there was something in his stance that Mira had never seen in 4 months, a kind of settling, a man taking hold of a thing he had set down a long time ago. The veil was never the weapon, Ensign. It was how we got here. Every trade has 2 halves, the quiet half and the loud half. We've spent all night being quiet. He looked at her and he smiled, and it was not the cold smile anymore. It was almost gentle. You've done the hardest work of anyone aboard tonight. You got us through 10,000 ships and 1 brilliant old man without firing a shot. Now let an old crew show you the other half of what StarForge builds. Chief, open the spine. Opening the spine, Captain. And Audrey Van's voice had changed too, gone low and fierce and glad. Been a long time. Along the patched and mismatched hull of the Cinder, panels that Mira had assumed were plating. The ugly, irregular corpse of other ships' plating that the Sethari censor prefect had read aloud for sport split and folded away. They had never been armor. They had been shrouds. And beneath them, running the entire length of the little ship's spine, was the thing StarForge had spent 40 years and too many lives learning to build in secret, the loud half of the trade, the reason a ship called Cinder carried a line beneath her name about giving back what she takes. It was a gun, one gun. But it was a gun built by the same minds that had learned to fold an enemy's certainty into silence, and it did to matter what the veil did to censors. It concentrated, folded, and refolded the entire output of the Cinder's roaring reactor into a single lance so tight and so total that the little 4,000-ton joke of a ship carried, along her hidden spine, a weapon that no dreadnought in the Dominion could match. The Sethari measured worth by mass. They had never learned that a small thing, folded correctly, could hold more than a large one. It was the same lesson the veil taught, written the other way around. It was the whole of what StarForge was. "Ensign Sato," said Captain Reuel Ash, and he sat down in the command chair and he took hold of his ship. "You know their formation better than any of us. You've been reading their nerves all night. Give me a firing solution through that wall. One shot. Make it count." Mira turned to her console, and for the first time all night she was not hiding, not whispering, not building lies in the dark. She was aiming. She looked at the 6 cruisers forming their wall, and she looked at the half-built array behind them, and she saw, because she had spent 4 hours learning to see the way the Cinder saw, the one line through the wall that the guard squadron had left open, the seam in their own formation, the place where their discipline had put a cruiser slightly too far forward and opened, for just a moment, a lane straight to the heart of the weapon. "Come to 317 Mark 6, she said, and her voice was steady. "Hold for my mark. The lead cruiser drifts out of the lane in 4 seconds. 3-2. The Sethari cruiser, maneuvering to interpose, slid a fraction too far, exactly as she had known it would, because frightened disciplined creatures overcorrect, and she had been reading frightened disciplined creatures all night. "Mark. Fire." Captain Ash fired. The Cinder's whole reactor emptied itself down her hidden spine in a fraction of a second, folded and refolded into a single lance of light so violent that the little ship kicked backward against it, groaning through every patched seam of her hull. The lance passed through the lane Mira had opened, missing the lead cruiser by less than the cruiser's own length, and it did not stop, because a StarForge lance does not stop for anything the Dominion has ever built. It crossed the gap to the half-built array at the heart of Keseth Deep, and it struck the weapon that would have ended the dark forever, and it went through it, and through the dry dock behind it, and into the primary fabrication core beyond that, where 11,000 years of Sethari shipbuilding stored the raw fire it fed to its cradles. Keseth Deep began to come apart. It did not explode all at once. It was too vast for that. It died the way a mountain dies, in slow cataracts of light, the great skeletal array folding in on the wound the Cinder had made, the dry docks rupturing one after another as the fabrication cores contained fire found its freedom. The sensor weapon that would have lit every dark corner of the galaxy and turned every human ship into a joke on a screen forever came apart in the fire of the forge that had built it, and the dark, the ancient, honest, merciful dark that the Sethari had spent 11,000 years trying to abolish, was safe. On the bridge of Eichmer's crown, 40,000 kilometers too far away, Overmarshal Veen Carroll watched the heart of his empire's greatest work die on the great cathedral display, and he did not speak, and none of his officers dared to. The guard squadron of Keseth Deep, 6 cruisers who had done everything right, turned in fury on the little ship that had done this. They had a firing solution now. They had the Cinder dead to rights, reactor spent, lance cold, lit up bright and close, and finally, at last, vulnerable. They fired everything they had. And the small, warm ship winked out of the universe. Mira had never cut it that fine. The instant the lance fired, the instant the reactor's roar collapsed back towards silence, she had thrown everything the dying reactor still held into the veil, and she had folded the Cinder's absence back over the ship one last time, and she had done it in the half-second gap between the guard squadron's decision to fire and the arrival of their fire. The cruiser's weapons carved the dark where the joke had been, and the joke was not there, had never been there, was already a cold, silent stone drifting sideways out of the light of the burning forge yard, gone from their screens, gone from their doctrine, gone from the only world the Sethari had ever believed in. "We're clear," the pilot breathed. "We're dark, we're cold, we're clear. They're firing on empty space." "Then take us home," said Captain Ash, slow and quiet the way we came. He leaned back in the command chair and he closed his eyes, and for the first time all night the weathered old man looked tired and human and glad. "Ensign Sato, log it. The array is destroyed. The dark is safe." A pause. "You did the whole thing. You know that, all of it. The getting in and the getting out. I just pulled a trigger." Mira Sato sat at her station in the cold red light, and she looked at the burning forge yard falling away behind them, and she found she had nothing to say, because the thing she felt was too large for words. She was 23 years old. 4 months ago she had known nothing. Tonight she had walked one small ship through the heart of an empire and taught 200 years of certainty a new word, and she was going to live, and so was the dark. On the bridge of Eichmer's crown, Overmarshal Veen Carroll watched the place on his display where the human ship had been and now, once again, impossibly was not. The forge yard burned behind it. His fleet was scattered, fractured, 40,000 kilometers out of position, and the thing that had done all of it had vanished a second time from the only site he had ever trusted, and this time he did not order anyone to find it. He knew they would not. He had learned that much tonight at least. The censor prefect turned to him, gray and shaken. "Ordinator, what do I log? What do I say happened here?" For a long time Veen Carroll did not answer. He looked at the empty dark where the joke had been, the dark he had spent his whole life trying to abolish, the dark that had, tonight, come alive and reached into the heart of his empire and taken from him the one thing he could not afford to lose, and then folded itself closed again without so much as a wake. And Overmarshal Veen Carroll, who 4 hours ago had laughed at a leaking scow and read its profile aloud for the sport of it, felt at last the full and final shape of the thing that had been growing in him all night, the thing so unfamiliar he had needed hours to name it. It was not fear, though it had begun as fear. It was not shame, though there was shame in it. It was older and larger and colder than either. It was awe. "Log the truth," he said quietly. "Log that we laughed at a single human ship. Log that we measured it and found it beneath the dignity of a warning shot. And log that it walked through the finest fleet the Dominion has ever fielded, unmade the greatest work of our forges, and vanished from our censors twice, and that at no point in 4 hours were we ever able to touch it, or hold it, or even reliably see it." He turned from the display, and his officers saw that the pride had gone out of the ancient creature, and something quieter and wiser had come into the space it left. "Log that we do not know how they did it. Log that they can, apparently, do it whenever they choose. And log this last, Prefect, in your own hand, so that whoever commands the next cordon reads it before he laughs at anything small and ugly crawling in out of the dark." He looked one last time at the empty place where the ship had been. "That we can no longer see them coming," he said, "and that we never could." Word of Keseth Deep spread through the Sethari Dominion faster than any signal, faster than any fleet, the way fear and awe have always spread. It changed, in the telling, the way such things do. The one ship became a fleet of ghosts. The young officer at her station became a legion of unseen devils. The leaking scow became a thing sent by whatever the Sethari believed in when their doctrine failed them. But the heart of the story never changed, because the heart of it was true, and it was this: that an empire which had measured all worth by what it could see had met, at last, a people it could not see at all, and had learned in 4 hours to be afraid of the empty dark it had laughed at for 11,000 years. They stopped laughing after Keseth Deep. Up and down the border, wherever a Sethari cordon caught some small, ugly, unimpressive human ship crawling in out of the void, the officers no longer read its profile aloud for sport. They watched it instead, with a stillness that their fathers would not have understood, and they wondered what it truly was, and where it truly was, and whether it was, even now, already somewhere behind them, cold and silent and patient, deciding whether tonight was the night it would stop being funny. The dark, which the Dominion had spent an age trying to abolish, had become the most frightening thing in their sky. And they had taught themselves that fear, in one night, at the hands of one ship, and could never again unlearn it. Aboard the Cinder on the long, cold, quiet run home, Mira Sato stood at last at the real viewport, the one no proper warship would waste mass on, and looked out at the dark. It did not frighten her. It never had. She had grown up in it and learned her trade in it, and tonight she had learned the last thing StarForge had to teach her, which was that the dark did not belong to whoever shouted loudest into it. It belonged to whoever was patient enough and quiet enough and unafraid enough to become part of it. Behind her, painted by hand on the bulkhead, the line she had never understood: "She gives back what she takes." She understood it now. The Dominion had given the Cinder contempt. And the Cinder, in the honest arithmetic of the dark, had given it back, folded and refolded until contempt became unease, and unease became dread, and dread, in the end, became awe, the awe of an old and mighty empire that had finally met a small thing it could not see, and would spend the rest of its long life watching the empty dark, and waiting, and wondering when the joke would come again. Mira Sato looked out at the dark that was safe now, and that was hers, and she smiled, and the small ship carried her home through the space between the stars, unseen, unhurried, and entirely unafraid.